So there's something important here that I think, so I'll just say that I skipped a significant portion of chapter 8, the piece that comes immediately after the declaration that Peter makes, and I will pick that up next week, and also some more of chapter 9. Today, I just really wanted to focus in on this declaration, the declaration that Peter makes, and then the declaration that God makes. Because I think there's something significant here before I get into more of the specifics of the response that Jesus gives. I want to focus on the response that they give. See, I am convinced that the reason that Jesus is holding back here is because he wants to say to them, I know something that you will only know when you go through it. You cannot know it by me telling you about it. You have to go through it, and then you will understand. So they ask Jesus. Well, Jesus asks them, who do people say I am? And they pick, 3 people, but it's not random, right? They say, some say you're John the Baptist, some say you're Elijah, and some say you're one of the other prophets. But this is not the first time in Mark that group of people has been lifted up as who Jesus might be. We go to Mark chapter 6, which is just a few chapters before. This is verse 14. King Herod heard of it, all the amazing things that Jesus was doing, for Jesus' name had become known. Some were saying, John the Baptizer has been raised from the dead, and for this reason these powers are at work in him. But others said it is Elijah, and others said it is a prophet like the one of the prophets of old. When Herod heard of it, he said, John, whom I beheaded, has been raised. So Herod was convinced that this is John come back. And what do the characters of John, and Elijah, and the other prophets have in common? Well, if John is raised from the dead, it's time to start whooping some ass. Right? And the same with Elijah. Remember, Elijah never died. He did a lot of whooping, and then he ran away, and then he came back and did some more whooping, and then ran away, and then he was carried off in a chariot of fire, and the mantle of whooping was handed to Elisha. And Elisha did some more whooping. In fact, he did twice as much, because he asked for twice as much of the Spirit that had been poured out on Elijah. And so this tells you right away the mindset of the people about Jesus. Because if they think it's John the Baptist come back, it's not just like somebody that has things to say, because he's back from the dead. I'll be back. That's the attitude. That's the energy we should be bringing to these declarations. If people think it's John the Baptist or it's Elijah, then fire is a-coming, right? And I think that's why Jesus says, yeah, I get it. That's what they say. But what do you say? And Peter is like, well, you're the Messiah. But he's not really saying anything different than all the other people are saying. Because his vision of the Messiah is, as we talked about in Bible study last week, is probably coming out of Zechariah, right? Which is a lot of burn it all down, a lot of burn it all up, a lot of let's get rid of the enemy, right? He's probably not thinking Isaiah chapter 53. This is Isaiah 53. I'll just read a little bit of it. Who has believed what we have heard, and to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? For he grew up before him like a young plant and like a root out of dry ground. He had no form or majesty that we should look at him, nothing in his appearance that we should desire him. He was despised and rejected by others, a man of suffering and acquainted with infirmity. As of one from whom others hide their faces. He was despised, and we held him of no account. Surely he has borne our infirmities and carried our diseases, yet we accounted him stricken, struck down by God and afflicted. But he was wounded for our transgressions, crushed for our iniquities. Upon him was the punishment that made us whole, and by his bruises we are healed. We are all like sheep who have gone astray. We have all turned to our own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. He was oppressed, he was afflicted, yet he did not open his mouth. Like a lamb that is led to the slaughter, like a sheep that is before its shearers is silent. So he did not open his mouth. By a perversion of justice, he was taken away. Who could have imagined this future? For he was cut off from the land of the living, stricken for the transgression of my people. That's a very different image of the Messiah. And what you'll notice throughout Christian scripture is it moves back and forth in these images of who is Jesus. Sometimes we get the Zechariah, the comeuppance, the fire and fury that is present in Elijah and is present in John the Baptist. And sometimes we get the gentle and the humble, born of a virgin, Emmanuel, God with us. And the tradition draws from all of these images from the prophets, these different narratives about Jesus. But there's something significant in here. And I think that Isaiah is the model that Jesus is most often drawing from, saying, I know something that you really can't know until you go through it. It's just like before I was a parent, I had a lot of opinions about parenting. And then you have a kid and you're like, oh, I didn't know anything. We had those experiences where you're like, from the outside, from the back seat, you know how it should all go, and then you get in there and you get responsible for it, and you're like, oh, wow, that's way harder than I thought it was. There's a lot going on there. You ever pick up a skateboard and get hurt real bad? There's a lot going on there I can't see. So I think that Jesus is trying to help them get this, and he takes them up the mountain. Takes them by themselves. He takes a select group. He's taken James and John and Peter. These are the guys. They may not be the sharpest bunch of tools in the shed, but they are definitely the hungriest. If you read through the Gospels, these are the guys that want to get it bad. They want to understand. They want to be close to Jesus. They are thirsty in modern parlance, right? And so he's like, okay, you're the most committed. Come on. Let's go. I'll show you something. I'll show you who I am. I will reveal the reality of my divinity. And of course it freaks him out. Right? Of course it freaks him out. Now let's look at the two people that they meet up on the mountain. Moses and Elijah. We get Elijah again. That's fun. And traditionally, right, the interpretation here is the law and the prophets. Right? This is the blessing on Jesus. The law and the prophets, everything is stacked up for him. We're good to go. I want to offer another interpretation, is thinking about what do Elijah and Moses have in common? Really different time periods, really different struggles, right? Elijah was not a leader of the people. He was a prophet. Some people followed him, but he was oppressed by Ahab and Jezebel. And then you got Moses, who is leading the people through the wilderness, hardcore dedication, 40 years. Some of the people aren't following still, but right, like there's some authority vested in him that is actively not invested in Elijah. Well, I'll tell you one thing they both have in common. They did a whole lot of murdering. Both of them. Remember when Moses goes up the mountain to get the Ten Commandments? And then what kind of crazy shenanigans are going on down the mountain? They start making some golden calf. They start pretending it's the Yahweh, but it's definitely not. He comes down, do you remember what he does? He smashes the tablets, rallies up some dudes, and just starts murdering people that are messing this up. Murdering people that are starting to worship this false god. Now, what's the most famous story in the history of Elijah? He's trying to prove that this worship of Baal is problematic. So he says, okay, I would like to declare a contest. You bring all your priestesses, you bring all your religious leaders, set up an altar, pray to your God. I will go over here. I'll build an altar. I'll do you one more. I'm going to soak the whole thing in water. Let's see what happens. And they're praying, and they're dancing, and they're singing, they're cutting themselves, and whatever. Nothing happens. Right? And it's been dry for 3 years, no rain. And Elijah's like, I think you need to be louder. I don't think your fake God can hear you. Right? He's like taunting them. I'm sure they are so angry at this point and tired because it's hot and they're out there doing all this stuff. And then Elijah prays to God, and what happens? Boom! The whole thing gets burned up. Right? The lightning comes down, strikes the altar, destroys the altar, burns up the water in the trough around the altar. Amazing display. And then he rallies a bunch of dudes and murders all of these priests, right? So again, you've got this setup where if it's Moses and Elijah and Peter sees these two here, he's like, yes, we're going to do the thing. We are ready. These guys know how to do it. We'll make some booths. You guys can make some plans. How are we going to do this thing? Let's hang out here and get a strategy so when we go down the mountain, we're ready. And I'm always so mad at Peter because if he just would have shut up, think about the conversation he would have heard, right? Think about the witness we would have got of the conversation between Jesus and Moses and Elijah. Because what else do Moses and Elijah and Jesus have in common? They were trying to lead people to God, and people were not doing a great job of following them. Do you remember all the whining and the complaining and the bickering that was happening in the desert? Right? And there's literally a pillar of fire, right? And that's the part that just blows my mind, right? Is people just like, nope, this is not good enough, right? And so what do Moses and Elijah and Jesus have in common? They have this commitment to keep going. This commitment when it doesn't look like people get it, when it looks like this is a waste of time, I am oriented towards you, God, and this people, right? Elijah literally goes into the desert and says, God, just kill me now because no one's going to follow me. No one's going to get it. And God's like, that's not how I talk. It's cool. I need you to stay in the game. I'm going to get some birds to come feed you so you can get your strength back so you can go back. Right? And I think Jesus is up on the mountain like, dude, guys, I need some advice. How are we going to do this? They still don't get it. How long? Is it going to 40 years, really? And you didn't ever make it into the promised land anyway? Elijah, you didn't even experience death? Like, how is this going to work? But we didn't get to hear that conversation, unfortunately. They got interrupted. You know, a lot of queer theologians talk about the transfiguration as Jesus' coming out story. This is the moment where Jesus reveals his full identity, his divinity to the disciples. And they still don't get it. I love that God's words are, shh, listen to him. Stop with the talking. More listening. But they still don't get it. They still don't get it. And one of the things that's interesting if you read about people's coming out stories is so often their first coming out story is just telling this who I am, not telling how I got here. Because how I got here might be way too painful an experience for me to tell you right now. I just tell you this is where I'm at. And you can't actually fully understand how I got here, because how I got here is something that took me a lot of pain and effort and labor and learning and work and suffering to get here. And you may never have gone through anything like that to figure out who you are. So I'm just going to tell you who I am, but I can't really tell you how I got here because you're not ready for it. Because I know something that you will only know when you go through it. See, suffering is not ennobling, but it is revealing. We learn stuff about ourselves when we go through suffering, right? We learn stuff about who we are, about our capacity, our ability, even if just our ability to survive something. How many of you know who you are because you have survived some stuff? You've been through some things. That tells you you've got the energy, the capacity, the ability to go through the next thing because you've been through this last thing. And that might have been terrible, and it might still be terrible, but here you are nonetheless. And you may not be able to tell somebody how you can get through the next thing because they don't know what you've been through to get here, to be able to go through the next thing. But they can at least know, you know what, I'm here right now. I'm headed through this next thing right now. I think that the core of the faith here is that when we say that we are followers of Jesus, Paul says, do you not know that all of us who were baptized into Christ Jesus were baptized into his death? Therefore we were buried with him by baptism into death, so that just as Christ was raised from the dead by the glory of the Father, so we also might walk in the newness of life. I think that as followers of Jesus, we are trying to participate in this new reality. And the disciples don't get it yet because they haven't been through this stuff. They haven't lost yet to know about the gift of reconnection. They haven't lost that connection, that relationship yet to know about the power of the reconnection. And that by following Jesus, by really going with him, not just through into the triumph, but through into the depths, into the hard parts, into the suffering, into the alienation, into the fear, then we can really know what it is, what the gift is of that reconnection, that return. So our suffering is not a gift to us because it makes us better people, but it helps us know what we're coming back to, what we're connecting with, what matters to us. And the disciples just are not ready for it yet, but they will be. And he's just going to have to hold on a little